How is potassium regulated in the body? What is potassium? Potassium, or K+, is the most abundant cation in the human body and a critical electrolyte for cell function. Let's begin with where does potassium live in the body? Here's the key. 98% of potassium is intracellular at about 140 milliequivalents per liter. Only 2% is extracellular, so in the interstitial space and blood, at about 3.6 to 5.2 milliequivalents per liter. This massive difference in concentration is essential for cell function, especially in the heart. So how does potassium get into cells? Continuously, potassium is pumped into the cells by the sodium-potassium pump, also known as sodium-potassium ATPase. This pump uses ATP energy to move 3 sodium ions out and 2 potassium ions into the cell. Why is potassium important in the body? What is its function? The potassium gradient creates the so-called resting membrane potential, which is very important for the function of the heart. But how? Since the pump creates a chemical gradient, so a difference in concentration of potassium, the more potassium enters the cells, the greater the potential for it to leave the cell again. Imagine a crowded elevator. The more people get in, the more uncomfortable it gets and the more people want to leave. In addition to this pump, almost every cell has a unique set of potassium channels, which are always open for potassium to move between the cell and the blood. The high concentration of potassium within the cell creates a great force for potassium to leave the cell again. With every potassium exiting the cell, one positive charge leaves the cell. The intracellular space around the membrane becomes more negative, and the outside becomes positive until the chemical gradient balances the electrical. This creates a resting membrane potential of about -70 millivolts to -90 millivolts depending on the type of organ. This enables the ability for sodium to enter the cell again during an action potential in order to execute a heartbeat. Therefore, changes in potassium concentration in the blood can lead to severe changes in heart function due to disturbances of this mechanism. Now you know the basics about potassium in the body. Where does potassium come from and go? Potassium comes from our diet. Most people have an intake of about 50 to 100 milliequivalents per day. Since potassium is soluble in water, excess potassium ions are secreted into the urine. Healthy kidneys can remove about 400 milliequivalents per day. In people with healthy kidneys, a poisoning with dietary potassium is generally speaking not possible, but in severe acute or chronic kidney damage, so AKI or CKD, hyperkalemia can be present. Generally speaking, potassium is found in lots of foods, especially vegetables, fruits and nuts. And a high daily intake seems to reduce blood pressure in otherwise healthy people. But those with kidney disease need to be careful about their intake. How is potassium regulated? There are 3 main hormones you need to know: aldosterone, insulin and epinephrine. And all of them act on the sodium-potassium pump by increasing its function. So higher levels of aldosterone, insulin or epinephrine move potassium into the cells. Aldosterone also acts on the kidneys in the distal nephron. It has an inverse relationship with potassium. When potassium rises, aldosterone increases to promote renal potassium excretion while retaining sodium. So aldosterone and potassium move opposite, but aldosterone and sodium move together. Insulin is secreted after the intake of food, moving potassium into the cells, making room for new potassium from the gut to enter the bloodstream. But why? Because a constant concentration in the blood is essential for the function of the heart. Epinephrine is active during physical stress or exercise by moving potassium into the cells. Let's answer the last question for today. What generally disrupts potassium balance? Potassium disorders relate to the concentration in the blood, not in the cells. Hypokalemia, which is a concentration below 3.6 milliequivalents per liter, may occur in patients with either too much insulin, adrenaline, or aldosterone. Hyperkalemia, which is a concentration over 5.2 milliequivalents per liter, may occur due to kidney damage or the use of special diuretics. Check out our individual videos to learn more. I hope you had fun learning about potassium, and I see you next time.